Hi, in this video we are going to be discussing the written prior consent, notice and consent for evaluation and reevaluation. But before we get to that form on GoalView, let's take a look at some of the information related to the compliance component. For an initial evaluation, the special education rules tell us that we have to, after providing written notice to the parent, obtain informed consent from the parent before conducting the evaluation. The timeline for the initial evaluation is 45 school days from the date of receiving parent consent. So within the 45 school days after we receive consent from the parent, we need to complete the initial evaluation and hold the determination of eligibility to find out if that student is eligible for services. For a reevaluation, we must also obtain informed parent consent prior to conducting the reevaluation. But the timeline for the reevaluation is it must be completed at least once every 3 years. An example would be that if the last determination of eligibility were held on January 20th, 2012, then the next reevaluation for that student must be completed sometime before January 19, 2015. So this date is within 3 years of this date that the last meeting was held. And within that, before that due date of the reevaluation, we must complete the reevaluation and hold a determination of eligibility meeting. So with that in mind, let's get started with our student and how to complete the prior notice and consent form. There are 5 folders within the prior notice, written prior notice and consent. We are not going to discuss the consents, the contacts. In folder number 1, student information, all of this data comes from the Skyward import. The home language and the student language are already filled in because they were filled in on another form. In this case, it was the referral form. In the evaluation status folder, we need to identify which kind of evaluation it is. And we need to identify the date or select the date that we are sending this notice to the parent. Folder 4 holds the evaluation areas. Now, whatever are the concerns noted in the referral, they must be addressed here and we must test for them. If it's a reevaluation, the IEP team determines what, if any, of this testing is needed. So let's say that the concerns are intellectual, academic, and social behavioral. So I will select those. However, some teams choose to mark all of these on the consent form because right here it says we may not need to give all these tests, but without your consent we're not going to test anything. So if you have a hunch that maybe communication may be a concern but it wasn't listed on the referral, then you would certainly want to list or check the communication. When that is finished, you would go to the print option. And instead of going directly to the final print, I'm going to take you to the print preview to show you a couple of things. This is the section where the parent would mark, I do give consent or I do not give consent. And this section always pops up anytime there is going to be an in-depth psychological evaluation. So if the cognitive area and or the social behavioral are marked as concerns, areas of concern, then there is a rule in GoalView that will cause this FERPA statement to pop up. And what this means is that if we're going to do any kind of in-depth psychological evaluation, the parent is allowed 2 weeks to think it over and to change their mind whether or not they want to give consent. So the parent may give consent to begin the evaluation, but if this is not marked, meaning they're not going to waive their 2 weeks, we can proceed with any of the other testing except for those kinds of tests involved in the in-depth psychological evaluation. So we could begin with academics or speech, but for an IQ test or behavior, social, we need to wait. There's a section right here on the last page of this consent form where a team member can write in the date that you receive this form back from the parent. It's really important to do that because on an initial, the 45 school days begin at the date that you receive this consent. Some teams choose to write it right on the top, the date that they get it back. So when you're ready to go ahead and finalize the form, select PDF Final, Done, and when this form is generated, you would print this off, make sure that the parent receives it. The parent reviews it, signs it. Either way, I give consent or I do not, and returns it. And then when the team receives it, they will mark right here that the date that they get it, if it's an initial. This form is also housed as an archived document. There it is, prior notice and consent. So that is how to fill out the written prior notice and consent for evaluation and reevaluation. Thank you for watching.